Yeah. Okay. So go ahead, Kali.
All righty. Well, welcome everybody to our panel today on the crisis of the political regime in the US and the limits of reformism. Happy to have you, and we will be starting up our panel in about 20 seconds or so. All right. Hi there. We are the Left Party, a revolutionary Marxist organization. We are for the liberation of humanity through the permanent mobilization of the working class to take power and establish a society that guarantees every human being's basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and education, alongside every person's full rights to freedom of expression in a way that minimizes the damage to the environment under the democratic administration of the workers who perform these services. This is what we mean when we talk about socialism. We are convinced that there is no way that a society focused on creating profits for industry and the ruling class it serves can address the significant issues to come, especially climate change. This is what we mean when we say socialism or extinction. The reason we're doing this is to set forward our perspectives and proposals to address the significant issues facing humanity. We want to help prepare for what is to come by identifying opportunities to organize and to make gains for the workers and the oppressed. We want to convince people who agree with us to join our organization and work with us to implement our proposals. Thank you for coming. So let's start out by talking about some of the fundamentals of the political situation. Excuse me. On January 6th, a crowd assaulted the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Was that a coup or merely a demonstration getting out of hand?
We will characterize that as a push. We will not give them the category of a coup d'etat. It was just a push. It was a demonstration or a meeting before the events occur where Trump spoke, and apparently he incentivized the people to march over and to Congress, to the Capitol. There were about 50,000 people, out of which about 4 or 5,000 marched down the Capitol. They have very brief skirmishes with some cops. Then the cops opened the defenses, and people just got into the Capitol, and they made some mess around it. They uh, take papers. They show that they have plastic handcuffs to arrest some Congress people, apparently. So it was a kind of a putsch. It reminds me, okay, saving the distances to the beer hall putsch uh, that happens in Germany before the Nazis took power. It was a flimsy, very badly organized demonstration in order to occupy some institution of power. They failed, and Hitler was sent to jail for several years, but it used it to gain popular support. Here, the same thing was achieved. Uh, People who participated, the minority that participated in the assault of the Capitol, believed that that was a victory because they were in prime time. They were able to stop the counting of the votes for several hours. So, and of course, now many of them are mad because uh, after uh, giving them some support, Trump turned around and condemned the activities of this crowd. So the Democrats or liberals are falsely saying that this was a kind of insurrection. An insurrection is actually an activity or a revolutionary act that the working class will do in order to gain power against the ruling class. This was no insurrection. This was a flimsy, badly organized putsch.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. Carlos, in Hitler, when he was in jail, of course, that's when he wrote Mein Kampf, and he actually gained a lot more of a following during that time. What is happening to in the meantime now with the movement here in America, with the same people that participated in the putsch on Capitol Hill? Is it waning, or are they gaining strength, or are they staying status quo, their power?
Well, they are gaining some traction. According to what I read and what it was reported in the media, they are recruited. They also have some setbacks. For example, the head of the Proud Boy was discovered was an agent or an informant for the FBI, Tarrio. There were other leaders that were discredited, but overall, they are kind of in the winning streak. Some of the organizations started to develop some kind of crisis, which is logical after these events. But in overall, I think they achieve certain degree of popularity.
Carlos, I got a question. What can you say or add to the fact that Trump's second impeachment and the possible political fallout could have gone either way for the Trump followers, or the mob that attacked the Capitol?
Well, the impeachment was developed as a way to discipline people who stray from the mainstream establishment. But now it was transformed into an attempt to fix what it was very damaged during the push on January the 6th, which is the political regime. So the Democrats accepted the fact they wouldn't present witnesses for the case of impeachment. They make it fast. They gave the Republican extra time to prepare. And finally, they come to a vote, and it was nothing. It was just a show that the Democrats trying to utilize it to rebuild the negotiating streak that the bipartisan political regime needs. The problem is that the Republicans are in itself in a crisis, and they have no idea how to proceed from here. And that is essentially because Trump, while he was defeating his strategy to do not recognize the elections, on the other hand, he was forced to accept the result of the election where Biden won for more than 7 million votes and left the White House after promising that he would never leave. So that's a defeat. But the rank and file of the Republican Party has bought up on all the accusations uttered by Trump before the elections and during the election and during the count of the votes. So, and he remained very popular. I just read a poll that said that about 70% or 75% of Republican rank and file still support Trump and will support Trump if he is the candidate in 2024, including Mitt Romney, which is his most adamant opposition is inside the Republican Party, just said in an interview, if he is the candidate, he will win the nomination. So the Republicans have this problem. On one hand, they want to distance from Trump. On the other hand, that will hurt the opportunity to get elected, and therefore are unable to establish the bridges or use the bridges that the Democrats are giving them to cross the aisles and trying to get some bipartisan agreement.
All right. Well, now that Joe Biden is our president of the US, what is the difference between a Trump government and a Biden government?
Well, if you look at what Biden is doing in the first few weeks in government, you will see some of the differences. He already ran into a very conflictive confrontation with the Chinese. He bombed Syria with no reason. He already threatened Iran with some action. He is doing what we characterize that they will do. He's trying to recover imperialism for an international kind of intervention around the world, something that Trump abandoned by embracing nationalist imperialism. Biden is proposing to actually start regaining the international stature and the characteristic of the United States as the cup of the world. And he is trying to do that. On the question of immigration, while he is full of rhetoric, they reestablished the camps for immigrant children inside the United States. He tried to explain, he said, well, there's a bunch of kids there, we need to have it somewhere. And so it's the repetition of Obama's, if you wish, politics on this area. On the question of the $15 an hour wage increase, Biden allowed one person who is unelected, who represents nobody, who is the parliamentarian of the Senate, to actually say, no, you can't propose that. And Biden said, well, that's the process. That's the undemocratic process that I'm going to respect, because that person is the one that guarantees that is bipartisan agreement in most major legislation that requires 60% instead of a majority vote. The Democrat could go and fire her because she's nobody. She has no status as an elected official. However, Pelosi and Biden and all the leaders of the Democratic Party, with some voices of discontent in the ranks, said that they will respect that process. That means that they are committed to a process, an undemocratic process, in which bipartisan agreement has to be achieved.
I was just going to interrupt that Senate parliamentarian made it so it was really handy for Biden, wasn't it? Because that Senate parliamentarian is taking all the blame, and Joe Biden could just go, oh, it's out of my hands.
Yes. But the question is, Kamala Harris, as a vice president and the head of the Senate, has the power to fire her or to dismiss what the parliamentarian wants, and they didn't use that card. So, and on climate change or climate catastrophe created by the capitalists, we have a denialist before, the president that was a denialist. He didn't like the idea of global warming and all the kind of stuff. Ironically, people like the governor of Texas supported that position. And now Texas has been gripped in a frozen vortex created by global warming over the Arctic. So the plan by Biden is, yeah, we believe that it's an important issue that we need to resolve. It's contrary to what Trump was saying. But what he is proposing is not even close to the reform proposed by the Green New Deal. It's something much more modest in terms of proposals and initiative, which essentially is giving the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, the industry they are polluting, enough time, and in time measured in decades, in order to progressively change into more acceptable for the ecology processes of industrialization by maintaining throughout those decades of time the rate of profit. The question is, we don't have time. We have, according to John Kerry, who is the czar of the environmental area in the government, we only have 9 years. And a correction to John Kerry, we don't have 9 years. We have 9 years probably to the unchaining of the catastrophes, but we don't have 9 years to stop what's going to happen, because what is going to happen is already in the cards. The cards have been dealt. The carbon dioxide is already in the atmosphere, and it will remain there even if we do everything possible to be zero emitters, no more gases tomorrow. We still will have this after for the next 200 or 300 years, because the question is already in the cards. We already did the damage. The bourgeoisie did the damage. So it's not 9 years to stop it. It's 9 years to try to do some measures to survive, but not to stop the catastrophe.
So, Carlos, you mentioned in some of the differences between the Trump and Biden governments, the way that each government was used imperialism. So speaking to that, what is the difference between nationalist imperialism and internationalist imperialism?
Well, nationalist imperialism is the recognition by a country, in this case, United States, that they are no longer the hegemonic imperialist power, that they are second or third rate imperialism, that there's already someone else that occupy the space that they used to occupy. And therefore they decided to accept that condition, re-entrench or entrench into itself, close the borders as much as possible, be self-sustained as much as possible, and stop spending money in regulating the life of the rest of the planet, and use that money to augment the profits of the bourgeoisie domestically. And an imperialist international, in this case, it's a recognition that China and the China-led bloc, including Russia, has already the upper hand. And therefore, well, we accept the second-rate position and we'll do as best as we can. This is something similar to what Great Britain or Britain did after the Second World War. They lost all the colonies, they lost part of the empire, they were diminished as the imperialist power, so they give then it comes the anti-colonial revolutions around the world, the independence of the major colonies like India and other countries in Africa. So they accepted that situation. They made some cosmetic changes to make appear that they still have a conglomerate of countries following them called the Commonwealth that now nobody pay attention to. But they accepted that position. They accepted that the United States was, after the Second World War, the hegemonic imperialist country. So, and they adapted to that situation. That's something similar what nationalist imperialism is proposing to do today in the United States, or the bourgeoisie who propose that. That's why I always say, do not use words like Trump wasn't stupid, or Trump is an idiot, or Trump is crazy, because that doesn't define anything. Trump has a political line. Maybe he didn't express it coherently sometimes, but nationalist imperialism is a real thought and a real strategy for part of the bourgeoisie. As opposed to that, internationalist imperialism says we cannot progress and be the hegemonic power of the world and continue to profit from the existence of capitalism at the world stage if we don't extend ourselves into other markets, if we don't defeat the enemies of Western civilization, if we don't operate as the cop that will resolve conflict between countries by forces if it's necessary, where we regulate, they say, the commerce and the industry and the national and the movement of troops around the world. That is the international imperialism. The recognition that we or they or the imperialism we are talking about, in this case, United States, is really fighting for the hegemony at the world scale.
I have a follow-up thing here, if you don't mind. I remember a long time ago when you, Carlos, when you put this concept in my head about nationalist imperialism, I kind of pushed back a little bit, and then you had something really profound to say. I said, well, how can they be nationalist imperialist if they're still committing military strikes overseas, right? Which occasionally happened, not as much as under Democrats, but with Trump, they definitely did those. And you said this, you said nationalist imperialism still has to defend the possessions it already has overseas. And still has to defend those interests. And so I was like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. So anyway, just in case anybody else out there was confused like I was, that concept of that Carlos introduced helped me understand it a bit more.
Yeah, good clarification on that. Carlos, you had mentioned some mischaracterizations of Trump and his political line. Speaking more to that, was Trump a fascist?
Yeah, I would like to ask Sean what he's thinking about this.
For me, this has to go back to, I guess, one of my earlier reports. And if you think about the whole time, this goes back to probably before Trump was even elected. There was lots of circles of everyone's different actors, people saying, they're going to leave the country if Trump is elected. It was that bad to the point where, okay, if this guy gets in office, this is like really big trouble. But if you look at his history and the things that he's done, supposedly there was this QAnon movement where Trump was supposedly fighting in, this secret group of people in the government. And it seems that his actions have allowed him to skirt around just barely being on the cusp of being fascist. Although he, I guess, never really committed any true crimes of fascism. But it's like I said, it's like he's just skirting with that or flirting with that idea almost up until the point where on January 6th, you got a lot of people who saw what he, I guess, how he incited the riot. And it's like, okay, well, now some people are ashamed that they have voted for him, or now they're ashamed of their affiliation with Trump. But I think, all along he's been just almost on the edge of that. But being that he was the president, there were certain things he could do and that he could not do. He's a very smart person. If you think about what he has done, a lot of the things he's done has not been just off the cuff, or where he wakes up and says, oh, I'm just going to do this or push these buttons. He's very calculating. And like I said, I think he's very intelligent. So he knows what buttons to push and when to push them, especially how to push them, so as not to unravel, the democracy and be labeled as a fascist, which I think he could care less, because once he has the power of the presidency, he feels that he is above the law at that point. And for sake of argument, for certain parts of it, he was, because no one would challenge him. People in his own cabinet wouldn't even, tell him the drastic things about the pandemic. So I think his, that question is a good question, but I think he was on the cusp of it. If you take his whole presidency, even maybe 10 or so months before he got elected, I think a lot of people would have that same sentiment that yes, that Trump is a fascist.
Let me ask a follow-up question. So will you say then that Trump utilized opportunistically all these extreme right-wing groups or proto-fascist groups as a facilitator? He gave them some kind of room to grow and to develop, but always under the control of his own political line. Is that what it is?
I'd say yes, because Trump is an opportunist. And now you have to go back and do your homework on not just him in the political arena, but him in the business arena, and then even him in the entertainment industry. Look at what he's done. He's been on this pedestal. A lot of people used to idolize him, and you go back even further into entertainment. He's been on different shows. He's been appeared and characterized in different movies. Fictionally and like in person. And, no one else has come to that, I guess, kind of level and then become a president. They call him a demagogue. And I think the people that follow him have always been of that same sentiment. They just didn't become that way because Trump was elected. They also had the opportunity, hey, this guy thinks like me. And then Trump also had the opportunity, hey, I have a following, whether they are on the same ideology as him or not, he still took that opportunity and ran with it for his own benefit, not for the benefit of the followers, but for his own personal benefit. So he was an opportunist in that aspect. And I think, that goes along with his whole political reign. And I don't think we're done, even close to even being done seeing the end of that.
So if it's determined that Trump himself can't be characterized as fascist, how can we define fascism then?
Well, fascism is the political strategy and movement created by a desperate petty bourgeoisie in times of profound crisis. Fascism is not a creation of an individual, but emerged from profound movements of frustration in the middle class. That was the origin in fascism in Italy and the Nazism in Germany. Desperate soldiers who came from the front, and in one case, Germany, because they were defeated. In the case of the Italian, because they felt that they were denied the fruits of winning the war, and frustrated with the establishment, the profound anti-establishment sentiments of the petty bourgeoisie, and also a profound distasteful and distrust of the working class organization, who they see as competing with the petty bourgeoisie, representing the working class for their own benefit at the expense of the petty bourgeoisie. That is the origin of the social basis for fascism. The desperate, frustrated petty bourgeoisie who is able at one point to unify under one leader with one program and transform itself into an effective political movement that will, on one hand, trying to control and regulate the bourgeoisie itself, and on the other hand, will try to defeat and smash working class and working class organizations.
Carlos, I was curious, what do capitalists like in terms of the big capitalists that are making the huge amounts of money, if like the Jeff Bezos and things like that, what would theoretically, what would their attitude towards fascism be if fascism bloomed below them and became the government of the United States? What would the capitalists like them and like the tech titans, all those guys, like Elon Musk, like what would they think of that?
Well, it won't be an impossible dream to expect that organizations like Facebook or Google at one moment can confluence or to join with some kind of militaristic middle class counter-revolutionary movement and be part of it. Facebook is emerging as a dictatorship over communications. You know, they can ban you if they don't agree with your political ideas. While I despise Trump, you know, I don't support Facebook or Twitter being able to, you know, prohibit somebody to express their idea in their platform, because that put them above the law and above any kind of traces of democracy. They are regulating speech, and speech is one of the basic kind of rights under even bourgeois democracy, or rhetorically is. So I don't see, it's only one step further from that, from prohibiting people and banning people from expressing their idea, no matter what those ideas are. It's only a short step towards forming an alliance with the extreme right wing. So I don't see them very, as a matter of fact, you know, writing a short story yesterday, I was putting the possibility that Facebook will join, you know, under extreme catastrophic events, climate events, will join with those remnants of the bourgeoisie that will survive in order to create a dictatorship in which they control communications, and the other and the bourgeoisie ally with them will control whatever is left of the military. So I don't see any impediment in the medium term or the long term of alliance of these sectors of the bourgeoisie with the fascist movement.
So then, Carlos, what precisely is the role of Trump when it comes to fascism?
Well, I think Sean explained this pretty good. He is a kind of facilitator. He facilitates the development of the fascists opportunistically, because they want to use them as cannon fodder and activists for his own purposes and objectives and strategy. The question will be whether this opportunistic utilization of this proto-fascist group will backfire on him. whether they can, gain some independence from him and actually develop into a full-fledged fascist movement. For that, they will need a charismatic leader, not in government, but fighting to establish state power. Fascism cannot be built from above. It has to be emerging from below, from the frustrations and mobilization of the middle class. And they have to find their own leaders, and they have to develop a full-fledged program. They don't have either one. They are, if you want a dangerous analogy, I would say that they are in the same situation of the extreme right wing in Germany immediately after the First World War. There were hundreds and open hundreds of groups called the Corps, which were as extreme and as a counter-revolution as the Nazis were. Actually, the Nazis were a very tiny group after the Second World War, First World War. And there were many Führers. All these groups have one person they call the Führer. So the real Führer, the one that took power, Hitler, has to navigate this reality, fight for leadership, defeat his opponents or other people who wanted to have the same title, and actually did it. We are in the United States, we have a very fragmented bunch of groups who claim the same ideology of direction in general. No one is leading the rest. They didn't even achieve a kind of a federated agreement to work together. Of course, they have no leaders, and some of the leaders that emerged, like Tarrio of Proud Boys, are agents of the informers of the FBI. So we are still in a process. There is immature movement that need still to create the leaders, get independent from Trump himself, and develop a program.
All right. Well, let's move on in the discussion to talking about the pandemic. What is Biden doing differently than Trump about this? And what should we expect of his actions?
If you mind, I'll answer some stuff with this. Biden is implementing a lot more federal response, but make it perfectly clear that the overwhelming economics or the overarching economic system of capitalism makes it really hard to impossible to actually control a pandemic. And so regardless if it's Trump or if it's Biden, it's going to be super difficult to do that because everything has to be gauged by its profit potential. Just like when we're talking about climate change in capitalism, profit potential has to be there. It could be the most apt, beautiful solution, but if it does not create profit for your shareholders, then it's not going to be explored. And the same thing with the pandemic. And the pandemic is creating some huge problems. And one of the initial things that happened with the pandemic was really cool for someone like me. It was the fact that everyone all of a sudden acknowledged that grocery store workers, migrant and farm workers, childcare workers, teachers were super important. Right? We're like the most important thing, like society would collapse without them, right? And so then those same workers would say, okay, we need some protections from this pandemic, seeing we're wonderful. And that's when what a friend of mine calls, I just heard this term applied to teachers. It's the Madonna whore dichotomy. And it's the fact that that at one moment, all of these essential workers are considered the Madonna. They're sitting, oh, thank you for your service. Thank you for everything you do. But the second you ask for protections or anything that would mitigate the profits of the ruling class, all of a sudden the workers are asking too much, and so they switch from being Madonna to the whore, and that was one of the things that came out of it. And so that's quickly happening right now. And even under Biden, he's being actually more aggressive about returning to school than even his operative, Trump's operative Betsy DeVos was, about getting people back to school. And the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, seems to be just as compromised as it was under Trump, if not more so, because they're being a little more creative. The CDC, they're being a little more nuanced in their words, but it's the same catastrophic results. They kind of the CDC says, like in terms of grocery store workers and teachers, says this is a safe environment, but in the fine print it says if these conditions existed, which they don't, like ventilation systems or sterilization things for the farm workers. So in terms of the difference between Trump and Biden working on this pandemic, it's just more of a federal thing, and the response is to get and the response is essentially, with Biden, it's to get more frontline work. It's nothing about curing or preventing death. It's just to get more frontline workers out there with one less excuse. Because that's happening, in my place of work. They're saying, "Oh, let us know when you get the vaccine." Well, I'm not going to let you know, because they want to use that as a bargaining chip to get you back to work. The other thing, sorry, I'm just going to ramble on like this. So, one of the other things is the fact that this really showed us. The pandemic under both administrations really showed us one of the side effects we could have really used of having a national healthcare system, which is a national database, an easily accessible national database in order to figure out who gets priority, who gets vaccinated, and who doesn't. But there's just not profit in creating such a thing. Right? It's just not profitable, and all the states want to create their own solutions, and all the tech companies within each state want to vie to get those contracts and do those things. That's why there will be no national database. So, in terms of putting those two things together, Trump and Biden, I would say just more of a national response, but to get vaccines into the bodies of workers. But along with that is an equally robust push to put people within workers within harm's way, and children within harm's way in schools and elsewhere. So that's what's happening. So while more people are getting vaccines under Biden and a more of a coordinated response, there's a backhand to that is now these workers have to expose themselves, or because there's nothing that says you can't carry the virus, transport the virus when you're vaccinated. So that is one of the things that is really worrisome, and that's what's gonna, if there is gonna be a second wave or third wave or whatever wave we're on now, that's gonna be the cause of it.
But I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical industry is not delivering enough vaccines. The vaccines took a year to develop, and it will take another year or more to actually have some effect in vaccinations. Meanwhile, we have new strains of the virus. So, what is the solution? What, as a society, we propose to actually solve this problem?
To solve the problem of the vaccines, like which particular problem are you talking about?
To solve the problem of the vaccine and try to find a solution for the pandemic itself.
Well, I think the solution of stopping pandemics is that's more directly yoked to climate change. because I think the pandemics will continue to arise as climate change is made to advance. Now, I'm not sure in terms of the socialist response to how we would fight or how we would develop vaccines differently. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If you could direct me in a more specific way.
I mean, what we do with the pharmaceutical industry that said, well, we do what we can, and we won't sell any vaccine to 130 countries in Africa and Asia. We won't sell enough to vaccinate faster the population, even in the United States or Europe. So what we do with them? How we?
They've proven to be ineffective tools of the people. So the people and the workers need to take them over, and they need to be tools. These huge pharmaceutical companies are too important to have them be ruled by profit motivations. That they need to be completely controlled by the workers, and the decision making has to happen from the workers. Where the new hotspots are, where we're getting new vaccines. And funnel as much resources, not money, resources as we need towards these things to get this done. But it should be 100% controlled by the workers themselves worldwide, not U.S. workers exclusively. All workers worldwide should have a say in this.
I'd like to add something to that, Chris. That was a very interesting point. The profit-driven pharmaceutical companies. I was just watching something last night. I think it was the CEO of Moderna. I forgot the guy's name, but more importantly, he was being asked a question that Moderna is on track to make upwards of $18 billion this year, not just because of the pandemic, but just because of who they are and where they are in this position in time in history. The same would go for Pfizer, Johnson and Johnson, and these other big companies. But that's, like you said, that's an interesting point. If they're in it for the profit, and I don't think anyone with half a brain could say, oh, well, the profit is just a byproduct of everything that's going on. It just happens to be that they're making 18 billion. They're really, out for us. I don't think anybody would say that, but you make a very interesting point. So there has to be some sort of shift away from the overall goal being profit, like as you stated.
Also, the development money being funneled to these companies we have not even heard of is huge. These companies that will never produce a viable vaccine and have probably no intention to are taking seed money from various governments, which come from workers, the taxes paid by workers, and they go straight to these companies worldwide, not just in the United States. And so there's a huge cash grab. There's a reason why all the billionaires are becoming close to being trillionaires, and it's because people are desperate and they're throwing the workers' tax money at these corporations because that's our only trick in capitalism. The only trick is, let's throw money at these corporations and maybe something beneficial to the workers will drip down, which we know that doesn't work. But anyway, that was just my take on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Callie. Sorry.
Well, if we are ready to sort of move on in the conversation, we can talk about immigration a little bit, because Biden is making a lot of proposals, but we say it won't work because it doesn't address the question's full scope. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Well, the question of immigration is profoundly linked to climate catastrophes. For the first time that I saw, a lot of times I saw immigrants coming into the United States basically for two reasons. One is political persecution in their home countries, or two, because extreme poverty. But now, for the first time, I heard many people who coming from Honduras in huge caravans of migrant workers who said that they were coming north because climate catastrophe has destroyed their lives and their houses and so on, because they have several typhoons and hurricanes destroying a number of localities and towns and coastal areas in Honduras. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Look at India, where millions of workers are displacing themselves into some other areas of the country, and eventually they will try to go outside the country because the lack of water. No, India is a country that is drying itself up, and thirst is pushing people to move. In the United States, we will have the same phenomenon. We will have people who will be fleeing climate catastrophe from the south. It is an estimate now that we have about 7 to 8 billion people, 6 to 7 billion people on the move in the next decade or so. We will have hundreds of millions of people coming north. And what is Biden proposing to resolve that question, which is the critical question of immigration? It's not a question to deal just with a few thousand immigrants who wants to cross the border into the United States. It is this climate catastrophe that will be pushing hundreds of millions up north. Why are they planning to do that? Well, Biden has proposed as immigration to form commissions to discuss what to do with a minor problem. So what they say is, okay, we will develop some kind of proposal that should be bipartisan proposal in order to give people who are already living in the United States, undocumented, a path to citizenship that will last about 12 years. 12 years. And then in exchange of that, we will fortify the borders, not with the wall as Trump wanted to do, because that's ineffective, but by putting much more technology, technology weapons, technology surveillance equipment, and eventually to put more boots on the ground. How they're going to solve with that proposal the upcoming millions who will migrate? The logic of the bourgeoisie is at one point they will have to use force, not the force of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, not the force of the ICE, but the force of the US Army in order to stop hundreds of millions coming to that. Our proposal is much different. Open the borders. Let all the people who need to move because to protect themselves from climate catastrophe, establish themselves in the areas of the world where they can do that safely, or safely for a while at least, and trying to develop the means so those people will have the best available conditions in order to settle again. Climate catastrophe and the rule of the bourgeoisie have made borders and countries into jails, and more so will develop into enormous prisons for those who are inside and for those who want to come in. It will be walls everywhere, and they are building them, and that's no solution. We associated will join with the migrants who wants to come into this country or go from India to Pakistan or Kashmir or whatever. And we will be part of that movement because we don't think that continue to have borders in the face of climate catastrophe is any solution at all.
Well, speaking more to that, as far as the millions and millions of people that will be migrating because of climate catastrophe, Biden explicitly rejected the Green New Deal and instead promised a program of his own. So would that be enough to start resolving the climate change catastrophe? If not, why not?
You want to answer that, Christopher?
Sure. I mean, it's just ludicrous because even the Green New Deal, like even if Biden did embrace the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal is not even close to being sufficient to stopping this. We need a full stop. We need a full stop of fossil fuels being used, and they know this. That they absolutely know this, and that's why they're grabbing every last bit of profit they can for whatever reason capitalists do it. But yeah, it is the Green New Deal in itself is not any kind of savior. They kind of dangle it in front of us as this is what we need to get ahead, but it is woefully insufficient to take care of our needs anyway. Same even with the the Paris Climate Accord or all those things that they're not even close to doing, because we need a full stop reset. And once again, back to the profit potential, and with climate change, those are the only solutions we're going to see, are solutions that have a profit potential, right? They have potential to create new jobs and to do this and do that, and to create new industries, exciting new green industries, right? But those will not work. We need profound solutions, and the solutions people are not going to like. It's going to be unpleasant if we want to save the world and save humanity, because we are going to need a full stop of fossil fuels, and that'll mean a drastic change of lifestyle for us all. But that is what has to happen. And Green New Deal is just making you feel like you're doing something while Rome burns. Yeah, you're fiddling while Rome burns. Yeah. Carlos, you have something to add to that?
Yes. Well, the Green New Deal only proposed to weatherize our homes and change our car for an electric car and things like that. But it's a plan to develop a profit-making new industry for the bourgeoisie, to have a progressive change in the productive sources to new ones. That the whole objective of the Green New Deal is to protect as long as possible the profit making of the bourgeoisie. And what we have to do, as Christopher clearly says, is a full stop, because we are not here dealing with something that it won't happen if we are nice with nature. It will happen because the bourgeoisie already destroying nature. So whatever is done is done. So what we have to do is to develop a plan to survive. And the first task of a survival list for humanity is to get rid of those in power who are actually stopping any solution to the problem, which is we want to survive. In order to survive, we have to get rid of the bourgeoisie. Because if we continue to be ruled by them, we will have only the continuation of the profit-making system until the last minute, until everything goes to hell. Look at some of the solutions they are proposing. First of all, they're proposing to have more nuclear plants. But nuclear plants are usually built next to waters, and the waters are rising because what happened in the Arctic and in Antarctica. So they will be invaded by water. You know what happened in Japan because a tsunami with that nuclear plant could be multiplied by 100. And it's only few of the nuclear reactor explode, that will be the end of civilization and human life and the life of many species in the entire planet. It's no solution. Look at the other silver bullet they want to implement to continue the profit-making system: manipulation of climate. The champions are the Chinese imperialists, who are developing a product which is essentially dispersing some chemical in the atmosphere to create or to control the way that it rains or create clouds and so on, in order to soften the effect of climate change. But what they're doing with that is to alter significantly, and if they do it at a greater scale as the Chinese are proposing, for example, they are proposing to have 55 million acres covered with this pretty soon, and then the entire country. What it will happen is that they will disrupt further the work of the jet streams. And the disruption of the jet stream is what caused the recent frozen vortex over Texas, which was created by the warming of the stratosphere above the Arctic. So the solutions to the problems, as the bourgeoisie see it, they only will compound the problem. So what we need is what Christopher said: full stop and get acquainted with the fact that we no longer can sustain the civilization as it is now with the modes of production that are destroying nature. And in order to do that, the first great task is to get rid of those who are in power, who allow this problem to intensify by the minute.
And one other thing that I want to add to that, I'm sorry, Sean, just one quick thing I want to say is there's going to be a big push coming up to anti-population growth push that's going to happen on the continent of Africa. It's going to happen in South America, Asia, and stuff like that. And as members of the working class, we have to push back against that because there's the working class and the people have no need to internalize the guilt of climate change. This is purely should rest purely on the shoulders of the bourgeoisie. They're 100% responsible for this. And so we need to push back when we hear those racist tropes about overpopulation in other areas, along with what Carlos said about with immigration, with opening borders. Those have to be part and parcel of the same policy. Sean, you had something you're going to say.
Yeah, Chris, thanks. I was going to add on to your comment about the, I guess, monetization or profitability from the climate change industry, whether it's a yaysayer or a naysayer. I'm in the architecture industry, and having been so for the last 20 plus years, I've seen it even as far as 10 years ago. We'd have our mechanical engineers or electrical engineers come to the office and give lunch and learns about how things are going to change as far as, trying not to burn so much energy mechanically or electrically in the facilities that we design, particularly schools or even houses. So for that matter, you have seen over the last decade changes in the codes, not just the California Building Code or the National Building Code, but the electrical code, the mechanical code, with regards to energy, quote unquote, and so to speak. So like, I'll give you an example. For a lot of the retail places that we find, let's say it'd be a Walgreens or a Rite Aid, they are both competitors. And so they're both battling to make sure that they have the same, or if not one up the other, as far as their electrical car charging stations that they are going to have in their parking lots. And it really gets down to the nitty gritty. Even in residential, in some areas of the states, you for new construction, you have to have your house set up for the photovoltaic cells, or you have to have your house set up for electrical car charging, not necessarily the full-blown conduit and connectivity, but you need to have the infrastructure there so that when it's time, then you can just go ahead and connect everything up. So those things have already been taking place. There's also been a push or a movement called net zero for schools and for all federal buildings. By 2030, there has been this push to have all federal buildings to emit, next to or close to net zero emissions. So that means that this building or buildings or complexes are going to try to harness as much energy as possible and not put out more than they intake. And it's a great concept, but if you think about all of this, a lot of this change doesn't happen without the exchange of money in some form or fashion, whether it be new codes. Okay, you have new codes, so you got to rewrite the code books. So now everybody has to have the latest and greatest code books. Those things cost money. The implementation of the codes, the teaching of all of these codes, as well as the different materials that it will take to now come to code for your new building. All of these things do trickle down as far as money in someone else's pocket, not in our pocket. So like I said, that's just one industry in the architecture industry. Multiply that by how many ever industries that you have that are all in motion, all trying to accomplish the same thing. And the profitability aspect just goes through the roof.
Well, speaking of economical reasons for problem solving or not problem solving, the US is currently in a recession. Would the proposed Biden economic packages resolve it? And if not, why not?
Absolutely not. I think it will be just the United States government and most bourgeois governments in the world are desperately pushing to reopen the economy at the risk of killing more and more people. Disregarding not just the pandemic, but as they do in the United States and Europe and Latin America and so on, they are worried, they don't want the teachers to go back to the schools because they want the kids to be educated better. They want the teachers to go back to school to take one more excuse, as they see it, for people not to go to work. Oh, I have to take care of my kids. Okay, we will put the teachers to take care of your kids. You go to work to the factory and get killed by the virus, and the teacher will die for the virus at schools. So this is the logic of capitalism. They are worried about reopening the economy worldwide. And if they do that with the pandemic, what do you expect they will do with climate change or other problems? For example, immigrants in this country are dying because they don't have jobs. They don't have access to the benefit that citizens have, like a extended and weatherized unemployment benefits. They don't have any of those things, and they are dying. And who cares? Do you hear any voice in the Democratic Party or among the liberals that said, hey, wait a minute, where is our help? Where are the $2,000 for all people who are undocumented in this country? What is the housing problem resolved for those people? Where is the prohibition to continue charging them exorbitant rents when they don't have a job? Why we don't give everybody a universal $2,000 a month to survive? Why you don't hear that from the Democrats or the liberals? Because that is far removed from their logic. And if they do that with the immigrants and the undocumented, what they will do when they show up at the door by the millions or hundreds of millions at the doors of the country, they will kill them. And what is growing now is the right wing saying they're responsible for all our problems, economically, environmentally, is the existence of poor people who procreate too many kids in too many countries. That is called eco-fascism. And that is starting to get a hold of part of even liberal communities. And that's not a solution. The world is not in the situation it is because poor people have kids or because they are poor. Actually, they are the product of the bourgeoisie who put this, the situation of the planet in the situation it is that created those poor people. So we embrace them, and we say we need universal measures to resolve or to help people to survive, which is what is at stake, to survive. Universal income, universal access to medicine, education, or whatever is left there to have access to. Universal is the word that socialists embrace, because every solution that we propose has to be universally applied. And the economy is no exception. Biden, what is proposing, if you look at the $1.9 trillion, I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but you will see that the benefit for the regular people, and regular people are only citizens, no immigrants, no undocumented, no poor community that is structurally unemployed. Because, for example, people who have been structurally unemployed, like in the Black community or in the Latino community, will not receive extended benefit for unemployment. If you look at the package, you will see that those allegedly benefit for the people is a very small portion of the $1.9 trillion that they pass now in the House and is expecting to be negotiated in the Senate. The majority of the money goes to companies and to the bourgeoisie and to the pharmaceutical industry to continue making profits at the expense of the economic crisis, the pandemic, and so on. Meanwhile, what you have is tens of thousands of closed businesses, small businesses. The petty bourgeoisie is suffering. And remember what happened when the petty bourgeoisie have no option to the left and they are pushed down by the bourgeoisie. What happened? They create the basis for fascism. And now we have tens of thousands, probably millions in the world of small businesses who are closed because of the pandemic. They will never come back. Or if they come back, they will come back in a short numbers, in shorter numbers than the one that existed before. And that is creating enormous unemployment, hidden unemployment. How are you going to solve that? One of the ways the bourgeoisie have is that huge companies like Amazon is taking, or Alibaba, or some other similar companies, are taking over the minuscule markets of these small businesses and incorporate them into the big market. So we have what we are seeing is the logic of capitalism toward monopoly capitalism. The big companies absorbing the bankrupt small companies and their markets, and delivering the service only in an amount minor than before, and employing one fraction of the workers they used to employ before. And that is the situation that is developing in the United States. There is no way that the plan by Biden or the bourgeoisie as a whole is to resolve the economic crisis, is to navigate on top of it and trying to secure that in the midst of this economic crisis, the bourgeoisie can sustain a level of profit that is acceptable to them. There is no feasible solution to the economic crisis, because once you start establishing some measures to recover the economy, then you will have a Texas again, or you will have some other kind of disaster. Did anybody quantify how much the United States lost in billions of dollars because climate disasters in the last 4 or 5 years? No. You know why? Because they don't want to talk about that. So climate change and climate catastrophe will bring the economy deeper into recession, deeper into economic crisis, and it's no longer possible for the bourgeoisie to resolve that. They may resolve the level of profit for a faction of the bourgeoisie, but will not be able to resolve, as they were before, the crisis in general, the bourgeoisie stabilizing prices and offer and demands and so on. There are some issues that we need to demand that will help not to resolve because there are two economies, one economy of the bourgeoisie and one economy for the working class and the oppressed. And there are different needs. The bourgeoisie will need to continue shrinking, monopolizing, and continue the profit-making process. The working class and the oppressed, what they need is survival tools. So we are inclined to resolve only the problems of the economy that are attached to the working class and the oppressed people. And so that's why we demand universal income of $2,000 for everyone, free education, health care, and so on. Consider all those rights like housing, education, and so on, health, as birth rights. I mean that you have to have access just for the sole purpose that you're existing, you're a human being, you need those services to be given to you as a right. And that's what we call at this moment the program socialism.
Speaking more to the inherent racism that exists within our current economy, the last leg of the Trump presidency was signaled by mass demonstrations against police assassination of Blacks. Would that subside and, or would it continue in the upcoming years in the Biden administration?
Oh, sure.
I think it would. I think it would continue. I mean, the whole incident that in Ferguson, Missouri, I believe, that was all under the Obama administration, which Biden was the vice president of. and Eric Holder was sent down to Ferguson to to make things happen. But since then, almost all the leaders down in all the protest leaders down in Ferguson, Missouri, have been assassinated, and they've almost all been eliminated. So, in terms of the racism and the violent racism that has been happening, I think that there's little to no indication that that would subside at all under a Biden administration. Carlos and Sean, what do you guys think?
I got something to add to that. This is something that I've always kind of heard or listened out for. Like whenever you have a change in power from one side of the aisle versus the other, Republican versus Democrat. In this case, you're going from Republicans to Democrats. And I agree with Chris. I don't see that there's going to be major changes, although there's been a lot of upheaval and a lot of demand for change, a lot of protesting. And what you will see is a lot of Band-Aid action is what I call happening, where it's like, oh, you have people like almost waving flags, and then someone comes along and says, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to help you. Here's a Band-Aid. Well, that doesn't do much for the situation. But one thing that is in the back of my mind is what my friend Keith has always said, is that it doesn't matter who is in power. The bombs are still going to continue to be dropped. And in this case, almost just like we were talking about earlier, where Biden had bombed Syria. People who had voted for Biden probably never thought that he would even do that. But the administration as a whole, imperialistic, ideological situation is the same. It doesn't matter who is in power. The imperialistic, bus needs to keep moving, for lack of a better term. So I concur with Chris. I don't think there's going to be much change, if any, just because of the transition in power from Republican to Democrat.
The main question is here to see where the problem of racism comes from. And the racist problem comes from the super exploitations of Blacks and Latinos and immigrants and so on. They need racism in order to extract from them extra surplus value, or to have them as the army of the unemployed, or to relieve the frustration of the petty bourgeoisie, the white petty bourgeoisie. Those are the uses of racism. Are those uses of racism have diminished, or is still very much alive in our society? And the second thing that we should ask ourselves is why the cops exist. We have a police organization throughout the country that together, if we just say, well, we are going to found the country of the cops, Copland, that Copland will have a more budget than the majority of the countries of the world. They have more military power than 85 or 95% of all armies in the world. They will have more powerful army as a cops than 95% of other countries. So we have a budget of a country, this time of a big country, this thing, given to the cops to pursue the activities. And we have a number and an armament, a weaponry that is capable of destroying by itself most of the armies of the rest of the country. And why we have that, why the United States imperialism has that, because they have to protect private property. They have to protect the stability of the bourgeois political regime. Will that stability better now than it was 2 years ago? No, it's worse. We have a crisis in the political regime. We are witnessing probably the destruction of the Republican Party and probably the split of the Democratic Party if some things happen. And the cops are there to protect that stability, to protect, restabilize that system. That's their role in society, is to protect and to serve, as they say in the cars, the patrol car, to protect and to serve, but they forgot another word, is to protect and to serve the bourgeoisie, not us. And they are trained to, out of curiosity, I inspected the training manual in several police departments. And until last year, they were teaching to the cadets that the Black Lives Matter were terrorists. They teach that to the cops. The cops have been fed every day the question of, you are here to protect this, and the suspects that you need to look for are on the wall, and they are all photographs of Black people and Latinos. They are fed with that. But they are fed with that because they know where they're coming from, the problem for the bourgeoisie are coming from. So we will have this police department and these cops has changed since last year when we witnessed a bunch of demonstrations because they killed Black people and some Latinos. Did they change already because the election of Biden? No, they are the same cops, the same police department, the same budget, the same training. And Biden has said, listen, for the first time in history, they ran a poll and they asked people, are you for the abolishing the police, defunding the police, or maintaining everything as it is? The astonishing thing was not that 40% supported defunding the police. The astonishing thing is that 18% of all the respondents said we need to abolish the police. That's mass support for an idea that we put forward as socialists to abolish the police. And having 18% support is incredible and is very encouraging. So what the government of Biden said, first of all, he said, I'm against abolishing the police. He said explicitly, I'm against defunding the police. And then come Bernie Sanders in his support and said, of course I'm against defunding the police. The police need more money in order to be more diverse and more fair. Like, they will be fairer with Blacks and Latinos and immigrants and oppressed people if they get better salaries and more things. So, no. And we are expecting new problems. We are expecting climate catastrophe with all the social disruption that climate catastrophe is bringing. And the police will be more needed than before for the bourgeoisie. And therefore, we will see an increase in the violence of police against oppressed communities in the country, no less.
I just want to add on real quick to what Carlos was saying, and also keeping with, I seem to be a one-trick pony during this presentation. All I do is bring up the profitability aspect of it, but I'm doing it again. And one of the things about police and why we absolutely must abolish them as an entity is the fact that, and Carlos said this rather well, is they are there to protect essentially the free flow of capital and to make sure that works, which is why they're totally ineffective in a pandemic and during climate change, because all the solutions to a pandemic and to climate change mean impeding the profit of the capitalists. Right? They mean impeding that. So the police, while we're trying to fight these battles, the police will 100% always support the funding or the flowing of capital over a green solution to something. And they will always support the anti-masker who's opening their business to no one wearing masks over people trying to wear masks. So with those two topics that we talked about, climate change and the pandemic, the police are with those aspects, not just the fact that they're murdering our brothers and sisters, is another reason why they absolutely must be abolished.
All right. Well, moving on in the conversation, let's talk about foreign policy a little bit, and the Biden administration role in that, and about the China-Russia bloc and Iran.
I think we talked already a little bit about that. I think we are pressed by time now. So I think we already got an hour, 2 hours almost of conversation. So if you can wrap it up, it will be fine. And then we can continue some other day. What do you think?
I think that's fine. Should we go ahead and
Let's do
conclude
it.
for today? Well, in that case, in our panel today, we've discussed the worsening national and international political situation from a revolutionary Marxist perspective, the perspective of the left party. We took a critical look at living conditions in the US and the world during the coronavirus pandemic. We talked about how the mismanaged and uncoordinated response to the virus, both nationally and internationally, helped the virus to spread. We talked about how the US government in particular has prioritized reopening the economy over public health, and how this has turned the richest country on earth into the country on earth that is the sickest with the coronavirus. We talked about how the pandemic fits into the larger existential problem of weather catastrophes due to capitalist-caused global warming. We talked about how climate change is happening faster than predicted and picking up speed. And importantly, we talked about how the economic and political system as it is won't allow the application of what tentative solutions exist on the scale that's required to solve the issue. The international ruling class will expend resources to the minimum extent possible so as to keep the profits rolling in. Remember that the ruling class of powerful countries stays in power by using its money and its imperialist military to exploit other countries. They have created and maintained racial oppression on an international scale for precisely this purpose. Here in the US, the ruling class has created law enforcement agencies to repress Black and non-white people with violence from the very beginning. Neither party can or will eliminate racist or classist violence. It's their bread and butter. Again, Republicans and Democrats aren't capable of resolving any of these issues the world faces. Each party depends on the other to remain in power. Without the evil Republicans, the Democrats don't look so good to their own voters, and the reverse is also true. This is why the Democrats are just as worried about the crisis in the Republican Party as the Republicans. If the far-right elements split out of the Republican Party, then the Democrats can expect its more left-leaning elements to follow suit shortly after. Under these circumstances, both parties will find it more difficult to hold on to power, which will benefit those of us who want to make radical change, both on the left and on the right. For our part, we will continue to fight against the right and against fascism. We will do this by campaigning for more democratic rights for oppressed people in the US, even as the Democrats and Republicans by bipartisan agreement try to take them away. Among other things, this means abolishing the Senate and the Electoral College, electing the president by popular vote and the House by proportional representation, 100% public financing for all political campaigns, restoring the right to vote to felons and non-citizens, abolishing the police, abolishing fossil fuels, all as a stepping stone to guaranteeing everyone's fundamental human rights to food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, and freedom of expression in an environmentally sustainable way. This is what we mean when we say socialism. In order to defeat the threat of fascism and the ruling class before we are forced into extinction, we need to abolish the Democrats' and the Republicans' bipartisan regime. In order to do that, we need a revolutionary workers' party to struggle for power against the Democratic and Republican parties at every level. This is what we are trying to build in the Left Party. So, if you agree with what you've heard today, we want to discuss with you working together politically. We want you to join the Left Party. We meet regularly to discuss these issues and coordinate our revolutionary activity, both nationally and internationally. We can't fix this as individuals, but we may have a chance to fix it together. And the time to act is now. Thank you for your attention today.